All right, everyone. I really hope you can hear me out there. My name is Dana. I'm one of the educators here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, coming to you from Long Beach. Now, if you can hear me and you have access to that Google form, go ahead and let us know. Give us a thumbs up or a yay. We're happy to be here. I do apologize. I want to thank you for your patience. We were having some connection issues, so I really do hope that we are able to connect through now. Yay, they can hear. Awesome, everyone. Well, good morning. Happy Wednesday. I was telling a story in here where I woke up thinking it was Friday, and then I remembered it was Thursday. And not for about 20 minutes did I realize it is, in fact, Wednesday morning. So I'm so happy you can be here joining us on Wednesday and that I didn't stay in a Friday. And so today we are going to be exploring some really cool things that have to do with the ocean, but also ties into things that you might already be learning about, such as glue and the science behind stickiness. So let's go ahead and explore the habitat that we see behind me. We're going to start here, dive in a little bit, and maybe talk about some of the animals that call this habitat home and the adaptations that these animals have. An adaptation is something that they have that helps them survive in their habitat. And we're going to be talking about animals that have either a natural glue or other sticky properties to help them survive in tide pools. After that, we're going to address some of the questions that you have on your Google Doc that is coming in. And then we're going to just explore some animals and then answer more questions and explore some animals and answer more questions. That is the program from here on out. Now, we do have you scheduled from 8:45 to 9:15. So if I can have my instructors, my teachers out there, use the Google document to let us know. Due to the delay, we're going to try to go to 9:20. Is that okay for you, or do we have to cut it off at 9:15? All right, so go ahead, let us know. Otherwise, let's get started. Let's take a look at this habitat behind me. This is what we call a tide pool. Now, I see my friend Miss Cynthia, who is looking at that Google document, writing away furiously. So I hope that means there's lots of questions coming in. Maybe some observations. Think to yourself, what exactly do we see here? I see a lot of rock work, right? Lots of rocks, all this dark space. I also see waves coming in. Do you see that? Waves coming in is very, very important for this tide pool habitat, as well as for why so many of these animals have stickiness as an adaptation. Okay. All right. Oh, I love it. So Marvin thinks creatures have something sticky underneath, like a snail. Levi thinks the creatures hold on tight. So you're really putting these thoughts into place of why these animals might need to hold on in this habitat. Right here. Check it out. Watch his wave come in. Ready? Whoosh. Do you see that crash over there? Ooh, there's going to be another one. Right over here. Whoosh. So this is what we call a tide pool. Now, throughout the day, the tide, the level of the sea level can rise and fall in certain areas. Right now, we're looking at low tide, meaning all of these rocks are exposed. And as these waves roll in, they cause crashing behavior like we're going to see over here and we're going to see over here. And those animals that call the tide pool home need to find a way to latch on and hold on tight because waves can be really, really active, right? Think to yourself, raise your hand if you have ever been knocked over by a wave, right? Standing in the ocean and whoosh, oh, the wave gets you. Honestly, I kind of love it. But my whole point of being in the ocean is to get tossed around by the waves. Animals living in the tide pool maybe don't like that as much. So let's go ahead and explore some of the tide pool characteristics itself. Carrie, can we dive into what might be in here? Or not dive in, it's pretty shallow. All right, so this is an example of animals that we might find within a tide pool. And you'll notice that all of these animals seem to be in some way holding on nice and tight to the rock work below or even the sand. Right here we have some anemones. Anemones. Now you can think of an anemone like a flower underwater and it's going like this, but it is in fact an animal, so it's moving and moving those tentacles around, catching food. So here is an anemone, and there is an anemone, and there is an anemone, and there. Right? So they're all over the place. Anemones are very, very common within our tide pool habitats. Oh, good. We've got some questions coming in. Now, We also have sea stars. Sea stars are very common in tide pool habitats as well. This is an ochre sea star. This is another kind of sea star, and another sea star, and another sea star, and another sea star. Sea stars are animals that hold on nice and tight, and we're going to explore those a little bit more later on today, or later on this morning. We'll learn about sea stars and how they hold on. We also have, let's see, these are some clam shells. We're going to be talking a little bit about some animals that are related to clams. We're going to be talking about mussels and barnacles. But as you can see here, there's a lot of action within a tide pool habitat. You can see a little bit of water movement coming in from that side of the screen, right? You can see all these animals kind of holding on tight. Now, Alexa wants to know, are there sharks in the deep end? Alexa, that's a great question. So if you look at this pool right here, you'll see it's really, really shallow, right? I could kind of put my hand in there and touch the bottom very easily. So there's not really sharks hanging out in our shallow tide pools. But what about out deeper? Carrie, do we have like a flyover where maybe we could see some tide pool habitats? Awesome. Carrie's going to kind of help us out. You might hear me reference Carrie and Cynthia a few times this morning. I am not alone in the studio. Carrie is controlling everything you see on the screen, and Cynthia is the one who's taking all of those wonderful questions and comments that you have coming in. So we're going to fly over tide pools, and you're going to see all in here. Here's those crashing waves I talked about. Ooh, look at some of the water coming in, right? So in here, there's no sharks, but right out here, yeah, I would argue there are definitely some sharks along this coastline. You might not see them in tide pools, but you can certainly see them on the coast. Now, we do have some very small sharks here in Southern California. Horn sharks have been seen near tide pools, but in tide pools. For the most part, you have to be in the ocean to see the shark. That's a great question, Alexa. And one reason that is because sharks don't have a way to hold on nice and tight like many of the animals that we find within tide pools. Now, Leah wants to know, are mermaids real? Leah, that is a wonderful question as well, because you're trying to think about, are they real? I hear people talk about them a lot, but I've never seen one. And as far as we know, mermaids have never been found in the ocean. So, not just the ocean, in lakes and rivers as well. Mermaids have never been found. So as of right now, mermaids are not real, Leah, but that's a great question. Now, I like to think, if mermaids don't exist, how can I become a mermaid, right? And that's where scuba diving and snorkeling come into play. So even though we can't be a mermaid, we can still get underwater and swim around with all of these animals. All right, Cynthia's writing a few more questions down, which is great. I'm going to take a moment to just let you observe some of these animals, get those questions coming, give you a second to ask those, and then I can continue answering them as they show up. So some questions might be, why are animals holding on tight into the tide pools, right? Why are they holding on tight? Why might an animal need to grab onto the rock? Well, we talked a little bit a moment ago about those crashing waves. These animals live in a habitat that has a lot of water movement, and they could get washed away if they're not careful. So by holding on nice and tight to these rocks, they're able to stay where they want. What about predators? What about predators? Animals that try to come and eat them. If you're holding on nice and tight to a rock like a sea star, ready, like this, holding on nice and tight, you're less likely to be picked off by a predator. So it is a way of making sure that they are not eaten. All right. We've got some more questions coming in. Going to give a minute or two to answer these, and then we're going to explore a sea star a little bit closer. All right, Jimena wants to know, why are starfish different colors? That is a great question. So if you take a look here, this is an ochre star. That's another ochre star. This is called a bat star right here. This is a giant spined star. So you'll see that there's different kinds of sea stars. And so just like a German Shepherd and a black lab dog look different, different sea stars also have different colors, right? And different patterns on them. Personally, one of my favorite sea stars is the chocolate chip sea star. We don't have a photo of it, but I encourage you all, with adult permission, to explore a chocolate chip sea star. It kind of looks like a chocolate chip cookie. All right. Alexa wants to know, how do animals breathe underwater? How do they breathe underwater? That's a great question, Alexa. If you look at these animals here, I'm not really seeing any noses or any mouths to help them breathe. But instead, a lot of them will have something within their body like gills or little pores on top that help bring the water in and take oxygen out of the water, right? So take a deep breath with me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Big breaths. So when you and I did that, we took a big breath, and then our lungs, which are right in here, they took oxygen out of the air. So these animals either have pores or through their feet, we'll get to that later, or gills that help them take oxygen from the water. Leah also wants to know, are hammerhead sharks in California? Wonderful question, Leah. So again, we don't typically have sharks within our tide pool habitats, but there are hammerheads seen off of our coastline, especially here in Southern California. Usually when the water gets really, really warm, so kind of in or early fall, we might see some hammerheads come in. It's not super often, but they do come up from the warmer tropical waters. Now, Maya's going to get us back on subject here, and Maya wants to know, how do the animals stick? Maya, let's go ahead and find out. Let's zoom in on some of our sea stars and get a little bit of an understanding of how our sea stars might hold on. Yeah, underside's perfect. Here we go. So this is the underside of a sea star, right? You can imagine next time your friend asks for a high five, which you can actually give them a high sea star because it looks kind of similar. Now, if you look here, right in the center, right there, that's the sea star's mouth. But what's coming out from the mouth? What are all these? Do you see this? These are called tube feet. Now, not two, but tube feet. I'm going to write it down for you. Tube feet. Like that. Tube feet. Now, these tube feet act like little suction cups for these sea stars. So sea stars will hang on to the rocks, or in this case, they hang on to the side of their exhibit where we can see them. And they have little suction cups, much like an octopus. So they have these little tube feet and they move around. In fact, Carrie, I think we have a video of them moving. Oh, check it out. They move very, very slowly. Now, this is something called, it's a big term, it's called a water vascular system. Okay. Now, what that means is instead of blood pumping through their veins like you and me, they just have water moving through their veins. And so within these little tube feet is actually just water. And they can squeeze or relax the tube feet to hold on. So you'll see, look, the ones over here are starting to reach. They're trying to find things. They're like, where's the rock? I know it's around here somewhere. And then eventually they'll latch onto that rock and they can actually pull the sea star forward. So let's take a moment to just watch this. Watch those tube feet. Now, tube feet are incredibly strong. When they all stick onto something and then squeeze, right, create that suction, it's really hard for any animal to pry a sea star off of a rock. So there's a lot of animals that might try, but this is an adaptation that helps them survive. It helps them hide from predators or hold on, protect themselves from predators. It also helps them protect themselves from those crashing waves. Now, Zara wants to know, what do sea stars eat? That's a great question, Zara. And actually, their tube feet play a part in how they're going to eat these animals. Sea stars like to feed on mussels and clams and snails, animals that have hard protective shells, okay? And these tube feet right here, well, they're used to hold on to the shell and pull it apart. So everyone go like this, okay? You are a bivalve. Now, that's a fancy way of saying you are a snail or a clam or a mussel and you have two shells, all right? So these are two shells. Let me see if I can kind of demonstrate this. One moment. All right, here we go. I'm going to borrow these two. They're not the exact same, but you'll get the idea. So we have two shells like this, okay? And the sea star takes those tube feet and holds on nice and tight. My hand is the sea star, and it goes like this. And it kind of covers it up, wraps all around. And then it starts to pull. And it starts pulling as hard as it can using those tube feet. Eventually, the animal that's within inside the shell is going to be like, please stay close, please stay close, please stay close. Ugh, it's too tiring, right? It's really hard. And so that shell pops open just a little bit. Now, this is where it gets really cool. The sea star's stomach comes out of the center, and it actually flips out of the sea star into the mussel shell. Okay? I think we have a photo of the stomach on a window. Awesome. So right here, that gob of goo, that is actually the sea star stomach coming out of the animal. And it would go inside the shell, eat whatever's inside the shell, and then the sea star goes like this. Slurps it all back up right inside its own body. So sea stars are amazing. And also take a look at these tube feet as they're holding on nice and tight to the window. All right. Now, Jimena wants to know, do sea stars have eyes to see underwater? How do sea stars know what they're holding on to, right? And how do they find their prey? Do they have eyes? Well, sea stars don't have eyes like you and I, okay? They don't have eyes that can look in the mirror and see an image. But right on the very tips of their arms, so like right down here and right here-ish, but on the top side maybe, they have they can sense light. So I want you all to try something, okay? I want you to watch me do it first. Go ahead. You're going to close your eyes and look at a light, and then you're going to slowly move your hand across your face like this. All right? Now, go ahead and try that. Did you see your hand? Right? You didn't see the outline or anything, but you can see the shadow as it passes over you. And that's kind of how sea stars can see. So if I were to come over this sea star right here and I were to like go like this and make it a shadow, it would know that there's something passing over it. They also can smell, right? They can taste those tubes, can crawl around and be like, is that a mussel that I want to eat? No. Is that a mussel that I want to eat? Right? So they can sense their environment. Like just like you and me. We don't have to see. If we didn't if we weren't able to see, we could sense our environment in other ways. For example, let's see, I hear this. I hear, and that tells me that our air conditioning is on, which is funny because it doesn't sound all that loud, but when it goes off, all of a sudden it's so quiet in here. And so just by using my ears, I can explore my environment. So they might not be using their eyes, they might not even be listening, but they can use other senses to explore their environment. All right. Let's see. Do we have any other good sea star pictures that we want to explore? Maybe get the wheels turning. Oh, this is a cool one. All right, my friends. So this is a sunflower sea star. A sunflower sea star. Now, you might notice that most sea stars had 5 legs, or 5 arms, we call them. But this one, let's see, we're starting here. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, back to where we started. 17 arms. Right? So just like the name sunflower sea star, it kind of looks like the sunflower, right? Now, this sea star has a lot of tube feet, as you can see them here. Now, tube feet are a kind of temporary glue. So we're learning about the science of how things stick, right? The glue. And tube feet are temporary. They can stick and unstick. Stick and unstick. So that's how they move. Do we all want to practice moving like a sea star? You're going to go like this. You're going to stretch out your tube feet. You're going to stick. And then you're going to slide and pull your body towards it. So we're going to stretch out our tube feet, stick, and then slide our body towards it. That's how these sea stars move. But the sticking and unsticking is what allows them to do that. Now, sea stars aren't the only ones that have tube feet. Let's go ahead and check out a sea star relative. A sea star relative. It's called the sea urchin. And you'll see that this is another animal that has sticky tube feet. Now, it's hard to see on here. Right now, it just looks very, very spiky. But do you see this kind of soft stuff in the middle, this darker purple? Those are actually their tube feet without any water. This sea star is out of water. Let's go ahead and see if, oh, it looks like Carrie's looking for one right now. We'll give her a moment. She's going to find one where the tube feet are actually in water and they're using that. Remember, I said they had a water vascular system, meaning that there's water inside of them. So this urchin is underwater, and these really long things right here, do you see that? All this long stuff, those are the sea urchin's tube feet. So you'll see that this adaptation, this thing that helps animals survive, can be different. Sea stars typically have little short ones. Sea urchins have quite long ones. Now, just like the sea stars, our sea urchins are going to be using these tube feet to stick onto things. The ones on the bottom tend to be a little bit shorter so that they actually can use them to hold on to the ground. The ones up top here, what do you think they're sticking onto? Could be other rocks. Sea urchins like to be inside little caves, right? It could also be sticking to algae. These animals like to feed on kelp and other algae, so they're sticking onto things floating through the water like bits of algae. Now let's jump back to the sea stars for a moment. Leah wants to know, do sea stars lay eggs? Do they lay eggs? That's a wonderful question. Sea stars are something called broadcast spawners, so they don't actually lay eggs. Instead, there's DNA released into this water, and then they hope for the best. So there's no sea star eggs anywhere. Alexa wants to know, do the sea animals sink to the bottom? Great question. So Alexa, it depends on the animal, right? So some animals like fish, they like to swim in the water column a little bit more. But some animals like our sea star and our anemone and our urchin, there's an urchin right down here. These animals stay on the bottom, okay? In fact, there's a word for that. We call them benthic. Benthic means the bottom of the ocean, benthic animals. And Jack, we're going to wrap it up with Jack here. Jack says, what are the predators of sea stars? So what eats these animals right here? All right. Now, sea stars are typically fed on by, I'm trying to think, sea lion, sea otters, sharks. There are some sharks that feed on sea stars. Birds. Birds is a really common predator of sea stars. Yeah, there's a whole lot of animals. So animals that live within tide pool habitats have to deal with ocean animals that come in with a high tide and land animals that come in at low tide. So I've also seen raccoons actually eat things out of the tide pool. We also have river otters that can come down to the coastline. So there's a lot of critters that feed on our sea stars. Now, we're going to take a second. We're going to switch gears here, and we're going to talk about an animal that might be a little bit more permanently glued down. So sea stars, like I said, are temporary. But we're going to go ahead and explore barnacles and mussels. I'm going to let Carrie pull up whatever photo we have of barnacles and mussels. And I just want to wrap up our program by talking about these animals and how they have an adaptation that's very similar. They do have a natural glue or adhesive, but unlike the sea stars that are able to stick and unstick and stick and unstick, these barnacles right here, once they lay themselves down, they're pretty much there for the rest of their lives. So barnacles float through the ocean as little babies, floating, floating, and then they find a place where they want to stay. And what they do is they actually will take their head. You heard it. They take their head and they go like this. And they stick their head onto a rock. Now, what they do is they secrete kind of a cement-like material, and it is the most powerful natural glue ever known. It's really, really hard to remove barnacles once they have attached. Let's see. It would take 22 to 60 pounds per square inch of strength. Now, what that means is that we would not be able to go over and pluck this barnacle off. Instead, we'd be there with like a pry bar, like, ugh, and eventually maybe we'd get it. It's very, very strong. In fact, my friends, it's so strong that they are using this barnacle cement to figure out how they could create underwater glues. Imagine you're trying to build something underwater, whether it's an artificial reef or a structure, and you need to glue things together. Well, Elmer's glue doesn't really work in the ocean. right? There's too much water. So instead, they're trying to identify how these barnacles are able to do it. Now, like I said, once they're there for good. But they're not the only ones. Do we have any muscle photos? Okay, stand. We're going to see if we can get a muscle photo here. Now, while those photos are getting pulled up, let's go ahead and get a couple more questions coming in. Judith wants to jump back to what do sea urchins eat and how. So remember I mentioned that those tube feet are there to, oh, perfect. Those tube feet are there to hold onto algae. So sea urchins really like to eat kelp. And just like the sea star, how it has a mouth right here, the sea urchin's mouth is right on the bottom, and they have these little teeth like parts that come by and just crunch on the algae. So this is a mussel, okay? No, not like that mussel. Those mussels. So mussels are a type of animal that live inside a shell like this, and just like the barnacle who glued his head to the floor, the mussels attach themselves to the rocks and hold on tight, and they are also more or less permanent. Now, mussels don't create a cement like the barnacles do. Instead, they have what's called a byssal thread, and they're long hair-like things that come off of the mussel that attach to the rock. So kind of like if you were to take your hair and you were to just go like this and glue it, and then you're just holding on, and that's it. That's what you deal with, right? And so these byssal threads, that's what's allowing these mussels to hold on nice and tight. They attach to surfaces using another little type of glue. But like I said, it is permanent. So unlike the sea star that can stick and unstick, stick and unstick, our mussels and our barnacles are more or less permanent. Byssal threads are also incredibly, incredibly strong. So this brings us all back to the question of why. Why are these animals holding on so tight? And the answer is usually predation and high wave impact in their tide pool habitats. And so they need to be able to stay in place no matter what they're dealing with. Now, my friends, we are going to wrap it up here. We just have a couple more questions coming in about sea stars. Joanne wants to know, do sea stars stick to other animals or just rocks? And Owen wants to know, do sea stars have teeth? So sea stars, in this photo, that's a great video, Carrie. Sea stars will, in fact, stick on top of each other. They're mostly just looking for anywhere that they can hang on, right? So sometimes that might be on rocks. Sometimes that might be on other animals. Typically, they're looking for a hard thing to hold on to. Rowan wants to know, do they have teeth? And no, they don't. So sea stars have that nice soft stomach that came out into the shell of the mussel. The urchins are the ones that have little teeth projections. All right, my friends, we are going to wrap it up on my side here. I'm sure there's probably more questions. If you're wondering anything and you want to learn a little bit more about this tide pool habitat, the exploration does not have to stop here. We have a lot of information on our website. We have a lot of webcams that you can explore. So go ahead and keep learning and discovering more about our Pacific Ocean. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning, which I know now, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.